The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Dalton Murphy finished burying her father beneath the Oklahoma red earth, and she knew immediately that her brother was dead too. She stood there on the hillside overlooking their small ranch, dirt still caked under her fingernails, her black mourning dress stained with dust and sweat under the merciless June sun of 1877. The shot had come from the direction of town, from Hill City, where Samuel had ridden 2 hours earlier to settle their father's debts with the bank. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her skirt, but not from fear. The tears had dried up 3 days ago when cholera took her father. Now, there was only a hollow numbness where her heart used to be. Dalton was 22 years old and utterly alone in the world. She walked back to the ranch house, a modest structure her father had built with his own hands 15 years prior, when they had moved to Oklahoma Territory, seeking a fresh start after her mother passed. The windows reflected the amber light of late afternoon, and for a moment she could almost imagine her father would walk through that door, smell of tobacco and leather, rough hands gentle when he touched her shoulder. But he would not. And Samuel, her sweet younger brother who had just turned 19, would not come riding home either. Inside, the house felt suffocating. Dalton moved through the rooms mechanically, gathering what little valuables they possessed. A silver locket that had belonged to her mother. Her father's pocket watch. The deed to the ranch, though she suspected that would be worthless now. The bank would come for the land. They always did. She found herself standing in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Dark hair that had once shone like polished mahogany now hung limp around her pale face. Green eyes that used to sparkle with life looked haunted, rimmed with purple shadows from sleepless nights spent nursing her dying father. She was not beautiful anymore, if she ever had been. Sorrow had carved itself into her features, aging her beyond her years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Dalton sat on the porch steps and did the only thing that brought her any comfort. She sang. Her voice, clear and pure despite the grief crushing her chest, rose into the evening air. It was an old hymn her mother had taught her, about green pastures and still waters, about fear and comfort. The words caught in her throat more than once, but she pushed through, letting the melody carry her pain out into the vast Oklahoma landscape. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly at the gate. Dalton stopped singing abruptly, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch railing. In these parts, unexpected visitors after dark rarely brought good news. She stood, weapon in hand, and called out, "State your business." The rider was silhouetted against the dying light, but she could make out a tall figure on a dark horse. He held up both hands, showing he meant no harm. "Madam, I apologize for startling you," the man said, his voice deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I heard singing and thought perhaps I could trouble you for some water for my horse. I can pay." There was something in his voice, a weariness that matched her own, that made Dalton lower the rifle slightly. "Water's free," she said. "Trough is by the barn." The man dismounted slowly, as if every movement pained him, and led his horse to the water. Dalton watched him carefully, noting the way he favored his left side, the stiffness in his gait. As he drew closer to the porch, she could see him more clearly in the lamplight spilling from the house. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness etched into it. A scar ran along his jaw, pale against sun-weathered skin. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore a gun belt slung low on his hips. "Your voice," he said suddenly, looking up at her. His eyes were an unusual color, somewhere between gray and blue like storm clouds over the prairie. I have been riding in darkness for so long, I had forgotten what light sounded like. Dalton felt something twist in her chest at his words. I was not singing for an audience, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. I know. He finished watering his horse and turned to face her fully. I could hear the sorrow in it. Beautiful things born from pain always are. Who are you? Dalton asked, unsure whether to be angry or moved by this stranger's words. Name's Porter Thorne, he said, touching the brim of his hat. I am just passing through, heading west. Trying to outrun some ghosts of my own, I suppose. Well, Porter Thorne, there is nothing for you here but more ghosts, Dalton said. Best keep riding. But even as she said it, she found herself not wanting him to leave. The loneliness of the past days had been crushing, and there was something in this man's eyes that spoke of shared understanding, of pain that matched her own. Porter studied her for a long moment. I have water now, he said finally. But if you have some food you could spare, I would be grateful. And I could offer you news from town if you want it. Dalton's heart clenched. You were in Hill City today, passed through around noon. Did you see anything unusual, hear any gunshots? Porter's expression darkened. I did. There was some trouble at the bank. A young man, could not have been more than 19 or 20. He went in to conduct business and there was an argument. The bank manager, a man named Carlyle, claimed the boy pulled a weapon. Carlyle's guard shot him. The rifle slipped from Dalton's hands, clattering on the wooden porch. She grabbed the railing to steady herself as the world tilted sideways. Samuel, her sweet, gentle brother who had never hurt anyone in his life, dead. She had known it in her bones when she heard that shot, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that shattered what little composure she had left. The boy's name, she managed to whisper. Did you hear it? Samuel Murphy, Porter said quietly. Dalton's legs gave out and she sank down onto the steps, a keening sound escaping her throat. No tears came. She was beyond tears now, in some terrible place beyond grief, where everything felt sharp and raw and impossibly distant all at once. Porter moved quickly, climbing the porch steps and kneeling beside her. You knew him, he said, not a question. My brother, Dalton said, her voice hollow. My only family, and now he is gone. Porter did not offer empty platitudes or meaningless comfort. He simply sat beside her on the steps, a solid presence in her spiraling world. After a long silence, he spoke. Carlyle is a snake. I have heard of him. He has a reputation for foreclosing on properties and claiming the land for himself and his associates. If your brother was there about a debt. Our father just died, Dalton said numbly. 3 days ago, cholera. He owed the bank money for the ranch. Samuel went to try to negotiate more time to pay. She laughed, a bitter sound. He probably did not even have a weapon. Samuel hated guns. Then it was murder, Porter said flatly. Murder the law will never call murder, Dalton replied. Carlyle owns the sheriff. He owns half the town. There will be no justice for Samuel. Porter was quiet for another moment, then said, Where will you go? The question hung in the air. Dalton had been avoiding thinking about it, but now she had no choice. I do not know, she admitted. I have no family, no money. The bank will take the ranch. I suppose I will have to find work somewhere, maybe as a seamstress or a laundress. The thought of leaving this place, her father's dream, her childhood home, felt like another death. Can you cook? Porter asked. Dalton looked at him, confused by the sudden question. Yes, why? Because I am hungry, and you look like you have not eaten in days, he said. Let me put my horse in your barn for the night, and you go inside and make us both some supper. We can figure out the rest after we have eaten. There was something about his matter-of-fact tone that cut through Dalton's fog of grief. She found herself standing, nodding, moving toward the door. It gave her something to do, a task to focus on that was not the crushing weight of her losses. Inside, she built up the fire in the stove and began preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. Her hands moved automatically through familiar motions while her mind spun in circles. What would she do? Where would she go? She had grown up on this ranch, had never been more than 20 miles from Hill City in her entire life. The thought of striking out alone into an uncertain world terrified her almost as much as the grief threatened to drown her. Porter came in after tending to his horse, removing his hat and gun belt and hanging them by the door. In the lamplight, Dalton could see him more clearly. He was indeed young, though his eyes held the weariness of someone much older. The scar on his jaw was old, long-healed. His hands, she noticed as he washed them in the basin, bore calluses and scars of their own. These were working hands, hands that had known hardship. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the clink of utensils against tin plates and the crackle of the fire. But as the food restored some of Dalton's strength, she found herself studying her unexpected guest. "You said you were heading west," she said finally. "Running from ghosts. What kind of ghosts chase a man like you?" Porter set down his fork and met her eyes. "The kind born from war," he said. "I fought for the Union. Joined up when I was 17, lied about my age. Spent 4 years seeing and doing things that no man should. When it was over, I went home to Missouri expecting to pick up where I left off. But my parents had died while I was gone. My sweetheart had married another man and the farm had been sold for taxes. I had nothing and nowhere to belong." "So you became a drifter," Dalton said. "A cowboy, mostly. I have worked ranches from Missouri to Texas. Saved up some money, lost it, saved it again. I am good with horses, decent with a rope, quick with a gun when I need to be." He paused. "But I am tired, Miss Murphy. Tired of moving, tired of having no place to call home. I heard there was good ranch land out in California, maybe a chance to start over. So I am riding west, hoping to find something worth staying for." Dalton felt a kinship with this stranger. They were both adrift, both scarred by loss, both searching for something they could not quite name. "Your voice brought light to my darkness," she said softly, repeating his earlier words. "That is what you said about my singing." "I meant it," Porter said. "I have been riding alone for 2 months, living in my own head with my own demons. Then I heard you singing, and for a moment everything felt less heavy. Your voice is a gift, Miss Murphy." "Dalton," she corrected. "My name is Dalton." "Dalton," he repeated, and the way he said it, gentle and respectful, made something flutter in her chest. "That is an unusual name for a woman." "It was my mother's family name," she explained. "She was strong-willed, my father always said. Insisted I be named after her line. Said women deserve to be remembered too." The memory brought both comfort and pain. Porter smiled, a real smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "She sounds like she was quite a woman. I barely remember her. She died when I was 7. Dalton stood and began clearing the dishes, needing to move, to do something with her hands. "Sometimes I wonder what she would think of me now. 22 years old, orphaned, about to lose everything my father worked for. I think she would see a woman who sat with her dying father, who buried him with her own hands, who sang hymns into the darkness because she refused to let sorrow silence her," Porter said, standing as well. "That takes strength most people do not have." Tears finally came then, hot and sudden, streaming down Dalton's face. She turned away, embarrassed, but Porter gently caught her arm and turned her back. He did not pull her into an embrace or try to quiet her tears. He simply stood there, his hand warm on her arm, bearing witness to her grief without trying to fix it or diminish it. Somehow, that meant more than any words could. When the tears finally subsided, leaving Dalton exhausted and hollow, Porter spoke again. "You should sleep. Tomorrow will be hard enough without facing it already worn down." "Where will you go?" Dalton asked, realizing she did not want him to leave. "I will bed down in your barn if that is acceptable. My horse could use the rest, and truthfully, so could I." Dalton nodded. "There are blankets in the chest out there. Help yourself." Porter collected his hat and gun belt, then paused at the door. "Dalton," he said, "tomorrow I would like to ride into Hill City with you to collect your brother's body and handle whatever needs handling. You should not have to face that alone." "You do not owe me anything," Dalton said. "You are just passing through." "Maybe," Porter agreed, "but tonight you fed a hungry stranger and let him water his horse. That is kindness worth repaying. Besides," he added, his voice dropping lower, "I do not think I could ride away tomorrow knowing you were facing that alone. Your voice brought light to my darkness, Dalton. Let me return the favor." After he left, Dalton sat by the dying fire for a long time, thinking about Porter's words. There was something about him that called to her, some recognition of kindred spirits both struggling against the weight of their pasts. She had been alone for so long, even before her father died, isolated out here on the ranch with only Samuel and her ailing father for company. Porter's presence, his quiet understanding, felt like water in a desert she had not realized she was dying in. Finally, she forced herself to bed, though sleep was long in coming. When it did, she dreamed of storm-colored eyes and a voice saying her name like a prayer. Morning came too soon, harsh sunlight streaming through the window. Dalton rose and dressed in her black morning dress, braided her hair, and went to start breakfast. She found Porter already awake, standing by the corral watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You are up early," she said. "Old habit," he replied. "Years of reveille will do that to a man." He turned to look at her, and she saw that he had shaved, making him look younger, less worn. "How did you sleep?" "Poorly," Dalton admitted, "but better than the nights before. Having another person here helped, I think. The house felt less empty." They ate a simple breakfast of eggs and leftover cornbread, then prepared for the ride to Hill City. Dalton saddled her father's horse, a steady bay mare named Molly, while Porter readied his own mount. The ride to town would take about 2 hours, and Dalton dreaded every moment of what awaited them there. The journey passed mostly in silence, though it was not an uncomfortable one. Dalton found herself studying Porter as they rode, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the alertness in his gaze as he scanned the horizon. This was a man who had learned to be watchful, to anticipate danger. She wondered what horrors he had seen in the war, what ghosts truly haunted him. "You said your sweetheart married someone else," Dalton said eventually, breaking the silence. "Did you love her very much?" Porter considered the question. "I thought I did at the time, but I was 17 and she was 16, and we were both children playing at being adults. The war changed me, made me into someone different than the boy who left. When I came back and saw her with her husband and baby, I realized we would not have made each other happy anyway. She needed stability, someone steady. I was too broken for that." "You still feel broken?" Dalton asked. "Less than I did," Porter said, glancing at her. "Some pieces have started fitting back together over the years, but I am not the same person I would have been if the war had never happened. That version of me died at Shiloh." Dalton understood what he meant. She was not the same person she had been even a week ago. Grief had wrenched her, carved away anything soft or naive, leaving behind something harder, more brittle. "I do not know who I am supposed to be now," she said quietly. "Without my family, without the ranch, everything that defined me is gone." "Then you get to decide who you want to be," Porter said. "It is terrifying, I know, but it is also freedom in a way. You are not bound by anyone's expectations but your own. Hill City came into view around midday, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings lining a wide main street. It was bigger than Dalton remembered from her last visit, 2 months prior, with new construction evident on the outskirts. Growth and progress, people called it, though Dalton had always thought there was something sad about watching wild land disappear beneath boards and nails. They rode directly to the undertaker's establishment, a somber building near the edge of town. Porter helped Dalton dismount, and she was grateful for the steadying hand he offered. Her legs felt weak, her stomach churning with dread. The undertaker, a thin man named Morrison, greeted them with practiced sympathy. "Miss Murphy," he said, clearly recognizing her from her father's funeral just days before. "I am so very sorry for your loss. Your brother is prepared and ready for burial." "I want to see him," Dalton said, though the words nearly choked her. Morrison led them to a back room where Samuel lay in a simple pine coffin. He looked peaceful, younger than his 19 years, the violence of his death hidden by the undertaker's careful work. Dalton stood beside the coffin, her hand resting on the edge, and felt the last of her family slip away into memory. "He was a good boy," she whispered. "Kind and gentle, he never hurt anyone." "I know," Porter said softly from behind her. "It is not right," Dalton continued, her voice hardening. "Carlyle murdered him as surely as if he had pulled the trigger himself, and there will be no justice, no accounting for it." "Probably not through the law," Porter agreed, "but there are other kinds of justice in this world." Dalton turned to look at him, hearing something dangerous in his tone. "What do you mean?" "I mean that men like Carlyle only have power because people let them have it, because everyone is too afraid or too worn down to stand against them." "Are you suggesting we confront him?" Dalton asked. "He will just have us killed too." "Not if we are smart about it," Porter said. He glanced at Morrison, who had discreetly moved to the other side of the room. "But this is not the place to discuss it. Let us handle your brother's burial first." They arranged to have Samuel buried in the town cemetery beside their father. Dalton had just enough money left to pay for it, leaving her with only a few dollars to her name. As they walked back out into the bright afternoon sun, she felt untethered, floating, as if she might simply drift away if Porter were not there anchoring her with his solid presence. "I need to speak with the bank," Dalton said, though the thought filled her with dread. "About the ranch debt." "Are you sure you want to do that today?" Porter asked. "If I wait, I will lose my courage entirely," Dalton replied. "Besides, I want to look Carlyle in the eye. I want him to see Samuel's sister and know what he has done." Porter nodded grimly. "Then I am coming with you." The Hill City Bank was an imposing structure of red brick, grander than anything else in town. It stood as a monument to Carlyle's wealth and power, a reminder to everyone who held the real control. Dalton's hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy door, but she forced herself to walk in with her head high. The interior was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside. A clerk sat at a desk near the front, and behind him Dalton could see the closed door to Carlyle's private office. The clerk looked up, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something colder when he recognized her. "Miss Murphy," he said. "I am afraid Mr. Carlyle is not seeing visitors today." "Then he can make an exception," Dalton said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I am here about the Murphy Ranch debt." "That matter has already been handled," the clerk said dismissively. "The property will be foreclosed at the end of the month. You have until then to vacate." "I want to speak with Carlyle," Dalton insisted. "Now." "The lady asked to see Mr. Carlyle," Porter said, stepping forward. There was something in his stance, the way his hand rested near his gun, that made the clerk pale slightly. "Sir, I must ask you to calm down. This is a respectable establishment and we do not tolerate threats." "No threat," Porter said mildly. "Just a man accompanying a grieving woman to conduct business. Surely Mr. Carlyle would not refuse to see the sister of the boy his guard killed just yesterday." The clerk's eyes darted between them, then toward the back of the bank where Dalton noticed two armed men standing. Guards, she realized. Carlyle took no chances with his safety. "Wait here," the clerk finally said, rising and disappearing into Carlyle's office. Porter leaned close to Dalton and whispered, "Stay calm. Do not let him see how much he has hurt you. Men like him feed on other people's pain." Dalton nodded, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. A moment later, the clerk emerged and gestured them forward. "Mr. Carlyle will see you now." The office was opulent, filled with dark wood furniture, leather chairs, and expensive fixtures that spoke of wealth far beyond what a small-town banker should possess. Behind a massive desk sat Edmund Carlyle himself, a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and cold eyes that assessed Dalton like she was a piece of property to be acquired. "Miss Murphy," he said, not rising or offering any gesture of sympathy. "I was sorry to hear about the unfortunate incident with your brother yesterday." "You mean his murder," Dalton said flatly. Carlyle's expression did not change. "It was a regrettable situation, but my guard acted in self-defense. Your brother drew a weapon." "Samuel did not own a weapon," Dalton said. "He hated guns. Everyone who knew him could tell you that." "Nevertheless, my guard perceived a threat and responded appropriately," Carlyle said with infuriating calm. "The sheriff has investigated and found no wrongdoing. The matter is closed." "Of course the sheriff found no wrongdoing," Dalton said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain composed. "Everyone knows you own him, just like you own half this town." Carlyle's eyes narrowed. "I would be careful about making accusations, Miss Murphy. Slander is a serious offense." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Now, if you are here about your father's debt, I am afraid there is nothing to discuss. The terms were clear, and with his death, the loan is in default. The property will be foreclosed." "My father's body is barely cold in the ground," Dalton said. "Give me time to sell some livestock to raise the money." "The amount owed is $300, Carlyle said. "Can you raise that sum?" $300 might as well have been $3,000 for all that Dalton could produce it. She owned perhaps $20 worth of livestock total, and even selling every possession would not cover a fraction of the debt. Carlyle knew this. She could see it in the smug satisfaction on his face. "I did not think so," Carlyle continued. "The ranch will be auctioned at month's end. You have until then to remove your personal belongings. I suggest you use the time to make arrangements for your future. Perhaps you could find employment here in town. I understand the saloon is always looking for girls." The implication in his words made Dalton's skin crawl. Porter stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is enough." Carlyle looked at Porter as if seeing him for the first time. "And who might you be?" "Porter Thorne. I am a friend of Miss Murphy." "I see." Carlyle's gaze sharpened. "Well, Mr. Thorne, unless you are here to pay the Murphy debt, I suggest you take your friend and leave my bank. We have concluded our business." "Not quite," Porter said. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his jacket and began counting out bills onto Carlyle's desk. $300, you said." Dalton stared in shock as Porter counted out the money, bill by bill. "Porter, no," she said. "You cannot. That is your money, your future." "It is my choice," Porter said firmly, not taking his eyes off Carlyle. "There, $300. The debt is paid." Carlyle's face had gone red, his jaw clenched with barely contained anger. "Where did a drifter cowboy get that kind of money?" he asked suspiciously. I saved it over 5 years of hard work, Porter said. Every dollar earned honestly, which is more than you can say, I would wager. Now, I believe you need to provide Miss Murphy with a receipt showing the debt is satisfied. For a long moment, Carlyle simply stared at the money on his desk, his expression venomous. Finally, he began preparing the receipt, his pen scratching angrily across the paper. When he finished, he shoved it across the desk toward Dalton. There. The Murphy debt is cleared. But do not think this changes anything, Miss Murphy. Your brother still drew a weapon on my guard, and he paid the price for his foolishness. Dalton snatched up the receipt, not trusting herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she would say something that would get them both killed. Porter seemed to sense this, because he took her arm and steered her toward the door. One more thing, Carlyle, Porter said, pausing at the threshold. You might own the sheriff and half this town, but you do not own everyone. People are going to hear the truth about what you did to that boy. They are going to hear about how you murdered a 19-year-old who never hurt anyone, just so you could steal his family's land. You might have the law on your side, but you cannot stop the truth from spreading. Get out, Carlyle snarled. And if I were you, I would not stay in Hill City long. This town is not friendly to troublemakers. Outside, Dalton found she was shaking, adrenaline and shock making her legs unsteady. Porter guided her to a bench in front of the general store and sat her down. Why did you do that? Dalton demanded, her voice breaking. That was all your money. Your new start in California. Everything you have been working toward. Porter knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me, Dalton. That money was meant for a fresh start, and that is exactly what I used it for, just not the start I originally planned. I do not understand, Dalton said, tears streaming down her face. Last night, I told you I was tired of drifting, of having no place to belong, Porter said. When I heard you singing, something in me shifted. Then I met you, and I saw strength and courage and beauty in the midst of terrible sorrow. This morning, I woke up and realized I did not want to ride west to California. I wanted to stay. Stay for what? Dalton asked, though her heart was already racing with understanding. For you, Porter said simply. For that ranch. For the chance to build something real with someone who understands what it means to lose everything and keep going anyway. I know this is sudden, and I know you barely know me. But Dalton, I have been wandering for 8 years looking for a reason to stop. You are that reason. Dalton stared at him, this man who had walked into her life less than 24 hours ago and had already changed everything. He had paid her debt, saving her home. He had stood beside her against Carlyle. He had listened to her sing and called it light in his darkness. I barely know you, she repeated, but there was no conviction in it. Then let us fix that, Porter said. Let me help you work the ranch. Let us get to know each other properly. And if, after some time, you decide you cannot stand the sight of me, I will leave and you will never see me again. But at least give us a chance. Dalton thought about returning to the ranch alone, about trying to work it by herself, about the crushing loneliness that awaited her. Then she thought about Porter's quiet strength, his understanding, the way he had known exactly what she needed without her having to ask. Okay, she said finally, but I will pay you back every cent. I do not know how long it will take, but I will do it. Porter stood, pulling her up with him. We can worry about that later. Right now, we need to handle your brother's burial, then we should get back to the ranch before dark. They spent the rest of the afternoon making arrangements for Samuel's funeral the next day. Dalton insisted on a proper service, even though it would cost most of what little money she had left. Samuel deserved to be remembered, to be mourned, to be laid to rest with dignity, despite the violence of his death. As they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Dalton found herself studying Porter again. He had given up everything for her, for a woman he barely knew. It was either the most foolish or the most romantic thing she had ever heard. "You really gave up California for me?" she asked quietly. "California is just a place," Porter said. "You are a person worth knowing. That is more valuable than any piece of land." That night, after supper, Dalton sat on the porch steps again and began to sing. It was the same hymn as the night before, but this time her voice was stronger, steadier. Porter sat beside her, not speaking, just listening. When she finished, he said, "You have a gift, Dalton. Your voice has power." "My mother used to sing," Dalton said. "My father told me that is what made him fall in love with her. He heard her singing in church and knew he had to marry her." "Smart man," Porter said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Eventually, Dalton said, "Tell me something about yourself, something real." Porter thought for a moment. "I was at Shiloh, second day of fighting. We were in the thick of it, and I saw my best friend take a bullet meant for me. He died in my arms, and the last thing he said was to tell his mother he loved her. When the war ended, I went to find his family to deliver that message. His mother had died the year before, and his siblings had scattered. I could not even grant him that last wish." "That is why you feel broken," Dalton said softly. "Part of it. I have other ghosts too, we all do, anyone who fought in that war. But I am learning to live with them instead of running from them. I am scared," Dalton admitted, "of tomorrow, of the future, of being alone." "You are not alone anymore," Porter said. "Not unless you want to be." Samuel's funeral the next day was a small affair attended by a handful of townspeople who had known him, a few ranch families from the surrounding area, and the preacher. Dalton stood beside the grave, Porter on one side and empty space on the other where her family should have been. She sang at the graveside, her voice carrying across the cemetery, and more than one person wiped away tears. After it was over, as people were leaving, an older rancher named Thomas Prescott approached them. "Miss Murphy," he said, removing his hat, "I wanted to say how sorry I am about your brother and your father. They were good people." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," Dalton said. Prescott glanced at Porter, then back to Dalton. "I also wanted to say that what Carlyle did was wrong. There are folks in this town who are getting tired of his games. He has been forcing people off their land for years, and we have all just accepted it because we were scared or figured it was not our business. But Samuel Murphy was a good boy, and this has gone too far." "What are you saying?" Porter asked. "I am saying that if you ever need help, Miss Murphy, there are people who will stand with you. Carlyle might have the law, but he does not have all of us." Prescott placed his hat back on his head and nodded to them both. "You take care now." After he left, Dalton turned to Porter. "Do you think he meant it?" "I think Carlyle has made a lot of enemies," Porter said. "Sometimes it just takes one spark to light a fire." They returned to the ranch and fell into a routine over the following weeks. Porter proved invaluable, handling the heavier work that Dalton could not manage alone. He repaired fences, tended to the few head of cattle her father had owned, fixed the leak in the barn roof. Dalton cooked, maintained the house, and worked alongside him when she could. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Dalton learned that Porter had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that he had a sister somewhere in Kansas he had not seen in years, that his favorite food was apple pie, and he could not abide coffee without sugar. Porter learned that Dalton had always wanted to travel, to see mountains and oceans, that she was afraid of thunder but not lightning, that she had nearly died of scarlet fever when she was 12. In the evenings, Dalton would sing while Porter listened, and slowly the songs became less about sorrow and more about hope. Her voice grew stronger, more confident, and Porter never tired of hearing it. One night, about a month after they had met, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. Dalton had been thinking about something all day, working up the courage to say it. "Porter," she began carefully, "why did you really stay? And do not tell me it was just because you heard me singing." Porter was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked finally. "I do not know," Dalton admitted. "Maybe." "I do not usually," Porter said. "I think we make our own paths mostly. But sometimes, just sometimes, something happens that feels like more than coincidence. I was riding past your ranch that night planning to camp a few miles down the road, but something made me stop when I heard your voice. And when I saw you standing there with that rifle, looking like you were holding yourself together by pure force of will, I saw someone I recognized. Someone as lost and hurting as I was, and I thought, maybe we could be less lost together." Dalton felt her heart swell. "I am glad you stopped," she said softly. "So am I," Porter said. He turned to face her fully. "Dalton, I know this is complicated. I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know that I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time." "I care about you too," Dalton whispered. "It scares me how much." Porter reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "It scares me too, but I think that means it matters. The things worth having are usually the ones that scare us most." They sat hand in hand until the moon rose high overhead, neither wanting to break the moment. When they finally said good night and retired to their separate rooms, Dalton lay awake thinking about how much her life had changed. A month ago, she had been alone and hopeless, about to lose everything. Now she had her home, her hope, and a man who looked at her like she was something precious. The next morning, riders appeared on the horizon. Dalton was hanging laundry when she spotted them, and a chill of fear ran through her. In her experience, unexpected riders rarely brought good news. She called for Porter, who emerged from the barn and immediately went for his rifle. There were 3 of them, and as they drew closer, Dalton recognized them. Thomas Prescott, the rancher who had spoken to them at Samuel's funeral, and 2 other local landowners, the Hendersons who ran a spread about 10 miles north. "Mr. Prescott," Dalton said warily as they rode up. "What brings you out here?" Prescott dismounted, followed by the Hendersons. "Miss Murphy, Mr. Thorne," he said, nodding to them both. "We wanted to talk to you about Carlyle." "What about him?" Porter asked, still holding his rifle though pointed at the ground. "He is getting bolder," Prescott said. 2 more families have lost their ranches in the past month. Both times, there were suspicious circumstances. One man's cattle mysteriously got sick and died, tank of water poisoned somehow. Another had his barn burned down with all his equipment in it. Both of them defaulted on loans and Carlyle foreclosed. "That is terrible," Dalton said. "But what does this have to do with us?" "We think he is targeting people systematically," Henderson spoke up. "Anyone who owns decent land that Carlyle wants. We think you might be next, Miss Murphy." "The debt is paid," Porter said firmly. "He has no legal claim." "Legal does not always matter to men like Carlyle," Prescott said. "What matters is what he wants, and he wanted the Murphy ranch. With your father and brother gone, and you being a single woman, he probably figured the property would be easy pickings. Then Mr. Thorne here showed up and paid the debt, which put a wrench in his plans." "So you are saying he might try something else?" Dalton asked, fear knotting her stomach. "We are saying you should be careful," Prescott said. "Keep watch. Do not leave the ranch unguarded. And if anything suspicious happens, you get word to us or the marshal in the next county. Not the sheriff here in Hill City, he is worthless." "Why are you helping us?" Porter asked. "Because we are tired of watching good people get destroyed while we stand by and do nothing," Prescott said. "Because Samuel Murphy was a good boy who deserved better. And because if we do not start standing together, Carlisle is going to own this whole territory eventually. After they left, Dalton and Porter looked at each other with shared concern. "Do you think he is right?" Dalton asked. "About Carlisle coming after us." "I think Carlisle is a man used to getting what he wants," Porter said, "and we embarrassed him. Men like that do not forget. So what do? We be careful, we keep watch, and we do not give him any excuse to come after us." For the next 2 weeks, life on the ranch continued, but with an undercurrent of tension. Porter began sleeping in the barn to keep watch over the livestock. They took turns staying awake through part of each night, listening for any signs of trouble. Dalton found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, jumping at shadows. But along with the tension, something else grew. The adversity drew Dalton and Porter closer together. They relied on each other, trusted each other, and somewhere along the way, friendship deepened into something more. It happened on a warm evening in late July. They had finished the day's work and were sitting on the porch, Dalton singing a lullaby her mother had taught her. When she finished, Porter said quietly, "I love hearing you sing, but I think I might love you more." Dalton's breath caught. "Porter." "You do not have to say anything back," Porter said quickly. "I just needed you to know, in case something happens, in case Carlisle does try something and things go badly. I needed you to know that these past 2 months have been the best of my life. That you have made me feel alive again in a way I did not think was possible." Dalton turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you sat beside me and did not try to make my grief smaller or easier. When you just let it be what it was and stayed anyway." Porter reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Dalton whispered. His lips met hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and hard-won hope, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "I want to marry you," Porter said. "When this is all over, when we know Carlisle is not going to come after us, I want to make this ranch ours, make a life with you if you will have me." "Yes," Dalton said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent that night sitting together on the porch, talking about the future they wanted to build. Porter wanted to expand the herd, maybe get some horses to train and sell. Dalton wanted to plant a garden, maybe some fruit trees. They both wanted children someday, a family to fill the empty rooms of the house. But their hopeful planning was interrupted 3 nights later when Porter shook Dalton awake in the pre-dawn darkness. "Someone is in the barn," he whispered urgently. "I heard noise. You stay here and keep the rifle." "I am going to check." "No," Dalton said, grabbing his arm. "We go together or not at all. I am not losing you too." They moved quietly through the darkness, Porter in the lead with his revolver drawn, Dalton behind him with the rifle. As they approached the barn, they could see a flicker of light through the gaps in the boards. Someone was inside with a lamp. Porter eased the barn door open slowly. Inside, they found a young man Dalton recognized as one of Carlisle's hired hands. He had a can of kerosene and was splashing it on the hay stacked in the corner. "Stop right there," Porter commanded, his gun trained on the man. The man spun around, dropping the kerosene can. His hand moved toward his gun, but Porter fired first, hitting the man in the shoulder. He went down with a cry of pain. "Do not move," Porter ordered. To Dalton, he said, "Get the lamp away from that kerosene before this whole place goes up." Dalton carefully retrieved the lamp and set it safely outside while Porter kept his gun on the wounded man. "What is your name?" Porter demanded. "Go to hell," the man spat. "Your name," Porter repeated, cocking his gun, "or the next shot goes in your other shoulder." Billy Marks." Well, Billy Marks, you are going to tell us exactly who sent you and why, or I am going to let Miss Murphy here decide what happens to you. And she just lost her brother to Carlisle's games, so I do not think she is feeling particularly merciful." Billy paled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Carlisle sent me. Said to burn the barn down, make it look like an accident. He is done waiting for the Murphy place. Wants you gone." "And if we had been sleeping in the house, caught unaware," Dalton asked, her voice hard, "would you have burned that too?" Billy did not answer, which was answer enough. "We need to get him to the marshal," Porter said. "This is evidence that Carlisle is behind the attacks on the ranches." They bound Billy's wound and tied him up, then loaded him onto his horse. As the sun rose, they rode into Hill City, heading not for the sheriff's office but for the telegraph station. Porter sent a message to the territorial marshal in Guthrie, explaining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. The telegraph operator, an older man named Wilson, read the message and nodded grimly. "About time someone stood up to Carlisle," he said. "I will make sure this gets through right away." Word of Billy Marks's capture spread quickly through town. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered outside the telegraph station, including Thomas Prescott and several other ranchers. The sheriff appeared, demanding they turn Billy over to him, but Porter refused. "He is staying in our custody until the territorial marshal arrives," Porter said firmly. "We do not trust your justice." The sheriff blustered and threatened, but with the crowd of ranchers backing Porter, he had no choice but to retreat. Carlisle himself appeared around noon, his face red with rage. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "You assault my employee and then kidnap him." "Sheriff, arrest these people." "Your employee was caught trying to burn down my barn," Dalton said loudly, making sure everyone in the crowd could hear. "Just like you had someone poison the Johnsons' water and burn down the Reeds' equipment. You have been terrorizing this county for years, and it ends now." "You have no proof," Carlisle sneered. "We have Billy Marks," Porter said, "and he has already told us you sent him. The territorial marshal is on his way. You can either leave now or stay and face justice." For a moment, it seemed like Carlisle might order his guards to start shooting. But the crowd of townspeople and ranchers outnumbered him, and even his hired guns seemed unwilling to start a bloodbath in the middle of town. Carlisle's eyes swept over the gathered people, seeing the anger and determination in their faces, and for the first time he looked uncertain. "This is not over," he hissed at Dalton and Porter. "Not by a long shot." But it was over, and even Carlisle seemed to know it. The territorial marshal arrived 2 days later with 3 deputies. They took statements from Billy Marks, who confessed to everything in exchange for leniency. They interviewed the families who had lost their ranches, documenting the suspicious circumstances. They audited the bank's records and found evidence of fraudulent loans and illegal foreclosures. Carlisle was arrested and taken to Guthrie to stand trial. His assets, including the Hill City Bank, were seized pending the outcome of the case. The ranchers who had lost their properties were given the option to reclaim them if they could repay the original legitimate debts. The sheriff was removed from office and a new one appointed. It took months for everything to be fully resolved, but when it was, Hill City felt like a different town. Lighter somehow, freed from the shadow of Carlisle's corruption. Through it all, Dalton and Porter worked the ranch together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They were married in September, a simple ceremony in the church in Hill City with half the town in attendance. Dalton wore a dress of pale blue and Porter wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the gathering erupted in cheers. Thomas Prescott stood as Porter's best man, and in his toast at the reception he said, "To Porter and Dalton Thorne, May your love be as strong as your courage, and may your ranch prosper as much as your hearts." Dalton sang at her own wedding reception, her voice filling the church hall with joy. Porter watched her with such love in his eyes that more than one person in attendance had to wipe away tears. That night in their ranch house that was now truly theirs, Porter held Dalton close and said, "I told you that your voice brought light to my darkness. But you brought so much more than that. You brought purpose and home and love. Everything I had been searching for, I found with you." "We found it together," Dalton corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." "Then we are even," Porter said, kissing her softly. "The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts." Porter's skill with horses became well known, and they began breeding and training them to sell, providing a steady income. Dalton's garden flourished, and she sold vegetables and preserves in town. They expanded their herd of cattle gradually, building their wealth slowly and carefully. 2 years after they married, Dalton gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel Porter Thorne, honoring both their pasts. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he was deeply loved. Holding his son for the first time, Porter wept. "I never thought I would have this," he said. "A family, a home, peace." "You deserve it," Dalton said, exhausted but radiant. "We both do." Samuel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara Elizabeth, after both their mothers. She had her father's storm-colored eyes and her mother's talent for music. From the time she could talk, she was singing, and Dalton would often find herself in tears listening to her daughter's sweet voice echoing through the house. Porter reconnected with his sister in Kansas, and she came to visit with her own family. Seeing Porter with his children, she said, "You have found what you were looking for, little brother. I am so happy for you." "I stopped looking," Porter replied, bouncing Clara on his knee while Samuel played at his feet. "That is when I found it, or rather when it found me." The ranch became known throughout the territory, not just for its quality horses and cattle, but for the singing that could sometimes be heard drifting across the prairie in the evenings. Travelers passing by would stop just to listen to Dalton's voice, and many said it was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. Thomas Prescott became a close friend, as did several other ranching families in the area. They looked out for each other, helped with roundups and harvests, celebrated births and mourned deaths together. The community that had once been fractured by fear of Carlisle's power became strong and united. Carlisle himself was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The bank was reorganized under new management, and many of the corrupt practices were rooted out. Hill City slowly rebuilt itself into the kind of town it had always wanted to be, honest and hardworking, and just. On Samuel's 5th birthday, Porter took him out to the field where Dalton's father and brother were buried. He had erected a fence around the plot and planted wildflowers. "These are your grandfather and your uncle," Porter told his son. "You never got to meet them, but they were good men. Your mother's father built this ranch with his own hands. Your Uncle Samuel was kind and gentle, and you are named after him. I want you to remember them and honor them by being the best man you can be." "I will, Papa," young Samuel said solemnly. Dalton, watching from a distance with Clara in her arms, felt tears slip down her cheeks. Her father and brother were gone, but they were not forgotten. Their memory lived on in this family, in this ranch, in the life she and Porter had built from the ashes of their sorrows. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the whole family gathered on the porch. Dalton sang while Porter kept time tapping his boot against the boards. Samuel danced with the exuberance of a 5-year-old, and Clara clapped her chubby hands in delight. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind that makes all the pain and struggle worthwhile. "Your voice brought light to my darkness," Porter said to Dalton, repeating the words he had spoken to her that first night so many years ago. "And it still does, every single day." "And you brought me home," Dalton replied. "Not just to this place, but to myself. You helped me find joy again after sorrow. You showed me that endings can become beginnings." Porter pulled her close, careful not to disturb Clara, who had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. "I love you, Dalton Thorne." "I love you too," Dalton whispered back. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Dalton thought about the journey that had brought her here, the losses that had nearly destroyed her, the stranger who had appeared at her darkest hour, the courage it had taken to trust again, to love again, to hope again. She thought about her father, who had always told her that the Murphy family never gave up, no matter how hard things got. She thought about Samuel, who had deserved so much better than the violence that took his life. She hoped they could see her now, see what their sacrifices had helped build. Most of all, she thought about Porter, this man who had heard her singing and stopped instead of riding on. This man who had given up his own dreams to save hers, only to discover they could build something even better together. This man who had looked at her grief and seen strength, who had listened to her sorrow and heard beauty. In the years that followed, the Thorne family continued to grow and prosper. They added more children to their family, a second son named Thomas and another daughter named Margaret. The ranch expanded, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Porter's reputation as a horse trainer brought buyers from as far away as Texas and Kansas. Dalton's vegetables and preserves won ribbons at the county fair year after year. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, Porter and Dalton stood with their children and watched the ceremony in Guthrie. They had lived through the wild days of the territory, survived corruption and violence, and helped build something lasting. As the new state flag was raised, Porter squeezed Dalton's hand and said, "We are part of history now. We helped make this." "We survived," Dalton corrected. "And we thrived." That is what matters. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work from their parents. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to study law, determined to ensure that injustices like what happened to his uncle never went unchallenged. Clara inherited her mother's musical gift and dreamed of becoming a music teacher. Thomas wanted to be a rancher like his father, while Margaret talked about becoming a doctor. Porter and Dalton supported all their dreams, even when it meant their children would eventually leave the ranch. They had learned that love meant letting go, meant wanting what was best for someone even when it was hard. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Porter surprised Dalton by organizing a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the years. The Prescott family came, along with the Hendersons and dozens of other ranching families. People from Hill City filled their ranch yard, celebrating not just Porter and Dalton's marriage, but the community they had all built together. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Porter and Dalton stood together on their porch, the same porch where they had fallen in love so many years before. Their children were inside getting ready for bed, their voices carrying through the open windows. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Dalton asked. "If you had ridden past that night instead of stopping, if you had never heard me singing all the time," Porter admitted. "And every time I thank God I stopped. Thank Him for giving me ears to hear and a heart that knew to listen." "I was singing about sorrow," Dalton said, "and you heard hope. Because you were still singing," Porter said. "That is what made it hopeful. You could have let the sorrow silence you, but you did not. You sang anyway, and that made all the difference." Dalton leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solidity of him, the steady presence that had anchored her for 20 years. "I love our life," she said. "I love what we have built. I wish my father and Samuel could have seen it, could have been part of it." "Maybe they can," Porter said. "Maybe they are watching from somewhere beyond, proud of the woman you have become and the family we have made." "I hope so," Dalton whispered. They stood there in the twilight, listening to the sounds of their children inside, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through prairie grass. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built from heartbreak and hope, from chance and choice, from darkness and light. Dalton began to sing softly, an old hymn about gratitude and grace. Porter listened, as he always did, and thought about that night so many years ago when a stranger's song had changed his life forever. He thought about darkness and light, sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings. "Your voice brought light to my darkness," he said again, "because some truths bear repeating." "And you brought music back to my heart," Dalton replied. Inside, their children called for them, wanting goodnight kisses and bedtime stories. Porter and Dalton smiled at each other and went inside together, hand in hand, to continue the life they had built. A life full of love and work and family and hope. A life that had been born from a cowboy hearing a woman sing despite her sorrow, and choosing to stop, to listen, to stay. The ranch prospered for many more years. When Porter and Dalton grew old, their children took over the operations, keeping the family legacy alive. They eventually had grandchildren who ran through the same fields Porter and Dalton had worked, who learned to ride horses and tend cattle, who heard stories about the grandfather who had been a cowboy and a soldier, and the grandmother whose voice had once been famous throughout the territory. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Porter and Dalton sat on their porch one last time, both gray and weathered but still deeply in love. Their children and grandchildren had organized another celebration, and the house was full of family and friends, laughter and music. 50 years, Dalton marveled. It has gone so fast. "And yet I remember that first night like it was yesterday," Porter said. "I can still hear your voice floating out into the darkness, still see you standing on this porch with that rifle, trying to be brave when your world had just collapsed." "I was terrified," Dalton admitted, "of you, of the future, of everything." "So was I," Porter said, "but we did it anyway. We chose courage over fear, hope over despair, love over loneliness." "Best decision I ever made," Dalton said, taking his hand. "Second best," Porter corrected with a smile. "The best was when you agreed to marry me." They laughed together, the sound of two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms, who had weathered every storm together and come out stronger for it. As the celebration continued inside, Porter asked, "Will you sing for me?" "One more time." Dalton's voice was not what it once had been, roughened by age and use. But she sang anyway, the same hymn she had been singing that first night. And though the voice was older, the emotion was just as pure, the love just as clear. When she finished, Porter said, "Thank you. For everything. For the life we built, the children we raised, the love you gave me. I have been blessed beyond measure." "We both have," Dalton said. "We found each other when we most needed finding. We built something beautiful from something broken. That is grace, Porter. Pure grace." They sat together as the sun set one more time, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, their family sang and laughed and celebrated 50 years of love. On the porch, two old people held hands and remembered, grateful for every moment, every choice, every blessing. Porter Thorne lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep with Dalton beside him. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the state, Dalton stood beside his grave and sang, Her voice was thin and wavering now, but it carried across the cemetery, a final tribute to the man who had heard her singing in darkness and called it light. Dalton lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her days on the porch of the ranch house, watching the land Porter had helped her save, remembering the life they had built together. She sang often, old hymns and lullabies, and people said you could hear her voice drifting across the prairie even when the house appeared empty. When she died at 84, the family buried her beside Porter. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, they carved a simple epitaph. She sang despite her sorrow and brought light to his darkness. The ranch stayed in the Thorne family for generations, a testament to the courage of two people who had met in grief and found joy, who had chosen love when everything else had been lost. The story of Porter and Dalton became part of the family legacy, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can be found in unexpected places. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is just right, people swear they can still hear singing drifting across the Oklahoma prairie, a voice clear and pure, carrying a message of hope and resilience and enduring love. The sound of a woman who sang despite her sorrow, and a man who heard light in her darkness, together forever in the land they loved and the life they built. Their story ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with loss but with legacy. They had faced down corruption and violence, grief and despair. They had chosen courage and love and hope again and again, day after day, year after year. And in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both, a family and a home and a love story for the ages. The Murphy Ranch, now the Thorne Ranch, still stands today, worked by descendants who carry Porter and Dalton's blood and their values. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the porch remains original. The same boards where two broken people once sat and discovered they could make each other whole. In Hill City, there is a historical marker that tells the story of Edmund Carlisle's corruption and the brave families who stood against him. Porter and Dalton Thorne are mentioned by name, credited with helping bring justice to the territory. But the real memorial is not made of bronze and stone. The real memorial is in every marriage that chooses courage over convenience, in every person who sings despite their sorrow, in every stranger who hears someone in pain and chooses to stop, to listen, to stay. The real memorial is in the understanding that darkness and light exist together, that endings can become beginnings, that love can grow even in the hardest soil if tended with patience and care. Porter heard Dalton singing despite her sorrow, and he said her voice brought light to his darkness. But the truth was deeper than that. They brought light to each other's darkness. They sang together through sorrow and joy, through hard times and good. They built a life that honored their pasts while reaching toward their future. They loved with everything they had, held nothing back, and in doing so, created something beautiful and lasting and true. That is the legacy of Porter and Dalton Thorne, cowboy and singer, survivor and survivor, two souls who found each other in the Wild West of 1877 and chose to build a life together. Their story is one of heartbreak and healing, of justice and grace, of music and love and the enduring power of human connection. And every evening, as the sun sets over the Oklahoma prairie, their descendants gather on that same porch and remember. Someone usually sings, carrying on the tradition Dalton started so long ago. The songs are different now, but the spirit is the same, a voice raised against the darkness, proclaiming hope and love and the promise that even in our deepest sorrow, we are not alone. That is how their story ends and how it continues, a song that never truly stops, passed from generation to generation. A melody of love that echoes across time, reminding everyone who hears it that light can be found even in the darkest places, if only we have ears to hear and hearts brave enough to listen.